BBQ Central show, let's go. The #1 barbecue show on the low. Your host Greg Rampy, the grilling master, spreading the info, getting to you faster, asking tough questions and having a blast. The BBQ Central show is here at last. The best moments of the BBQ Central show in 10 minutes or less. Come on, let's go.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the best moments of the BBQ Central show in 10 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Solberg. Today, the show is pulled from August 23rd, 2011. Malcom Reed stopped by to talk to Greg about barbecue texture. We're going to get to Malcom in just a few minutes, but first, let's get to know Bubba Latimer just a bit. Bubba is a competition cook as well as a restaurateur.
The best moments of the BBQ Central show in 10 minutes or less. Come on, let's go.
Bubba Latimer joining us here on the show. All right, Bubba, so for the people that might not know you, let's go ahead and back up a little bit here since we have time. For those that aren't familiar with BBQ, you, your wife Shannon, how did you get into this whole barbecue deal? I mean, was barbecue something that was just, in your family when you were growing up and it's something that you just got into down the road? Or perhaps was it not around you and this is something you just happened into later in life?
Well, it really is something that happened later in life. I've always enjoyed the grilling and the smoking aspect of it. How I got into the business itself, I had another company where I dealt with the food service industry, and during that, I thought that I would like to have a restaurant, and if I ever did anything, it would be barbecue. And literally what happened, a customer of ours that we dealt with had a location. They moved down the road, and I went and looked at it. 2 hours later, told my wife, hey, guess what? This is what we're going to do. So that was November of 2004. We opened up our first restaurant in Jasper, and it really was just kind of one of these things where I said, hey, we're going to do this, and we sink or swim. And then somehow or another, I ended up talking to people that were in the contest part of the barbecue world. Went out, a guy asked me to come cook with him one weekend. I went and spent Saturday with him. Called my wife and told her, hey, we're going to go spend a bunch more money. And 2 weeks later, did my first contest. And the first contest I did was in May of 2006 and won that, which is the worst thing in the world that could have happened to me because hook, line, and sinker. And 5 years later and several $100,000 and tens of thousands of miles, here we are today.
When you made that initial purchase, since you've been competing for 5 years, what did you buy for a cooker at that point?
Well, for my competition cooking, I started off with a Lang 84, and I spent about 4 or 5 months running around with tables strapped to the top of my Suburban and my cooker and coolers and just did our thing. Like anybody else out there, you get into it and you find out what you need, what you don't need. And I remember meeting Ron Montgomery, and one of the comments he had made to me was that people that typically tend to do well have accommodations. And a couple months after that, we got our first trailer and have just moved on from there.
All right, so you got into a Lang. What are you using now?
I use now, Stumps is the product that I use when I compete. And I'm on my fourth Stumps unit now. I started with a 223, and then I went to an Elite model, which they no longer make. Mm-hmm. Then last year I cooked on a Stump Stretch, and then up until April of this year, I used that Stretch, and then we have now a modified version of his Classic.
is that something that you plan on sticking with, those type of vertical or cabinet smokers? I mean, going from a Lang to a Stump's obviously a big departure. You're working with an offset cooker in a Lang, and then to go to a Stump's, more charcoal driven than anything else, with wood chunks probably for smoke flavor. Was that a ability to get rest during a competition as well? Because obviously with a Lang, you're feeding that thing probably every 45 minutes to an hour, depending on what kind of fire you're running.
Yeah, that's exactly it. As you really get into the barbecue and you start learning how many different types of pits really are out there, I really like the idea of the insulated gravity feed cookers. And so I went to a contest in Birmingham a few years ago and literally drove over and bought my first Stomps, came back and used it that weekend. And there was definitely a learning curve on it because it is such a different cook from the stick burner to that. But what I found is I like the way that it cooks. It's, environment really don't matter, rain, hail, sleet, snow, any of that. And once you learn how to cook on it and set it up, you can still get some rest. You can produce great products on the product. And at the same time, if you're somebody like myself that is doing, 35 to 40 contests a year, you're not worried about spending up the entire night just feeding that thing with the fuel. I'm not one of the hot and fast cookers like some of the other guys out there. So, for me, I found that it works great. They're wonderful pieces of equipment, and, they work great.
What were some of the things that you wish someone would have told you to help your ramp up or learning curve?
The biggest thing that I wish I knew in the very beginning, and the biggest piece of advice that I actually give anybody, is keeping things simple. That's the same thing we do with the food at our restaurants, and realistically what I do when I compete. I've done a lot of fancy ingredients. You hear about things, you see things, but ultimately, I think barbecue it's a simple product, and if you can focus on that and find flavor profiles that appeal to the masses, that's really what works out best. I've spent a lot of money on different ingredients, and that doesn't mean that you're going to produce that much more of a product. Ultimately sticking to the basics, and you don't have to bring everything from your house out to compete. Keep it to the minimals, have a schedule together, and just run with it.
I didn't know if I was going to actually ask this or not, but since you made mention that you cook lower than, probably the majority of people that are out there, doing it as much as you do. A lot of power cookers out there cooking the hot and fast. I had a conversation with a gentleman based out of Chicago who runs the Amazing Ribs website, who said that barbecue is evolving, and you can't have this revisionist, or only traditional definition of barbecue, which to me is between 200 to 250 degrees, and it's done with wood smoke and all this stuff. And I made a point to him that I would not be somebody who relents, that I would not be, or I would continue to be a revisionist, and that what the majority of people seem to be doing, or at least we hear about in competition cooking, this the butter poaching of chicken, brisket and pork and ribs at 350, 400 degrees, in my term, is not even barbecue. It's some bastard version of what we attempt to do out in the backyard. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I kind of disagree with that, and the reason being, we all have different perceptions of what something should be. If you want to say that I'm more of a purist and we tend to go the low and slow method, then that's what you say. But in the last several years, and I guess if anybody wants to attribute anything to the power cooking, I think Myron pretty much started that whole thing and has had a lot of success. And there's a lot of other teams that have had great success with it as well. You've got Tuffy, Mike Davis, just to name a couple right off the top of my head. Trig. These guys have turned that into a way that they can cook, and obviously they're putting out a great product. We also, if something has happened at the restaurant and something's happened, we've power cooked there. I've had to power cook in my Stumps cookers before because of something that happened out there. I still think that you can still produce a great product, plus meat products themselves have changed over the last 15, 20 years. And so you have different contents of fat and the way the texture of meat itself is out there. And, ultimately, however you cook, if the end product is something that you enjoy or the people eating it enjoy, then I don't think that it really matters how it was done. Now, when I say that, I don't agree with cooking something in an oven all day long with liquid smoke and sodium nitrates and all of that and just throwing a bunch of barbecue sauce on it. That's kind of, that's just not barbecue in my opinion. You still have to have, wood and smoke and all of that.
The best moments of the Barbecue Central show in 10 minutes or less. Come on, let's go.
So let's not waste any more time. We'll race over to the hotline and bring up who is now becoming a regular on the show. It's Pitmaster of Killer Hogs Barbecue Team, Malcom Reed, joining us here on the show. Malcom, how are you, buddy?
Man, I'm good, Greg. How are you?
I'm absolutely fantastic, Malcom. I appreciate you making time for the show tonight. And, I was saying in the very open of the show when I was teasing who was going to be on the show, that, you have this website, How to BBQ Right, and of course you have your Killer Hogs website as well, killerhogs.com, and you sign up, you get this email newsletter. Is it once a month that you do it, or you do it twice a month?
Here lately I've been trying to do one every week, but, sometimes I skip, how it is, but just when I feel like I've got something relative to say, I'll go ahead and jot it down and send it out to people.
There you go. So, another one of these emails has hit my inbox. I'm like, God damn, here's Malcom again coming up with a great idea. About texture of barbecue and overdone, no texture barbecue. And I think this is kind of where that consuming general public has, I don't want to say ruined barbecue in restaurants, but the expectation of what is good barbecue perhaps is not even good barbecue at all. So let's talk about texture first, and more specifically, overdone barbecue. What does it taste like? What does it feel like in your mouth? Give it that texture.
Well, to me, overdone, when I say overdone barbecue, I'm talking about meat that, no matter whether it's pork butt, ribs, brisket, when you take a bite of it, it's just kind of like mush. It's almost like it takes on a peanut butter texture, and that's, to me, that's overcooked. And there's so much of it out there people are trying to pass off as good barbecue. That's what got me to write this whole newsletter about it.
So whose fault is this, Malcom? We love to place blame here on the show. I love to point the finger as long as it's not at me. Are we looking at, let's say, there's Damon's, a place for ribs out there, which is like a national chain, or you have Applebee's, you have, Tony Roma's, where they serve you these, for lack of a better barbecue, everybody knows ribs. They want to almost like get a rack of ribs, serve them on a plate, and then be able to grab the bone and just like extract it right out of the meat. This is not what we're looking for.
And that's what got the general public so confused over it. They think just because, the meat's falling off the bone that it's done. Well, me and you both know that if you pick up a bone and the meat's laying there, that meat's so far gone. It's all you're going to taste is the sauce they put on it. You're not even going to get anything from the meat. So
do you think that there is a possibility that at some point in time the consuming public will ever be educated to what a properly cooked barbecue is going to be? Or as long as these restaurants are out passing off their half-assed barbecue, we're kind of at a disadvantage when we're looking to spread the gospel of correct barbecue?
Yeah, I hope so one day, and that's why I do what I do and try to get the word out. But if people keep eating the stuff and thinking it's good, it's almost like you're fighting the losing battle.
You had said in the email, in your opinion, there's lots of folks out there that don't know jack about good barbecue. And then you kind of went into a paragraph about one of the key factors to have in your arsenal to kind of monitor how good barbecue is being cooked. What is that?
A meat thermometer. That's the number one thing you got to have. And I don't care, if it's just the $5 job that you can get at Walmart, or if it's one of the fancy thermopens. I mean, you got to have something that you can get the internal temps on that meat. We're talking pork butts. I'm going 198. Briskets, I'm pulling them right at 198 as well. Those two stay about the same. I mean, you'll see different people talk about different temperatures on them, but the way I cook them and the way I help people, when they're asking me what to cook to, I tell them for butts and briskets, shoot for that 198. If you take it up into 200 or higher, chances are it's going to be overdone. With chicken, I don't let it go near as far. It goes to 185 and it's done, and that's going to get the texture of the skin right exactly how you want it. Plus the meat won't be dry. Now, ribs, that's like you said, I've never stuck a slab of ribs, so I have no idea what the internals are on them. But, you have to know how to do a bend test on a slab of ribs, what the bone should feel like, and that just comes from experience with cooking them. I mean, I can sit here and tell you that, you pick a slab of ribs up. You hear people talk about the bend break test. Well, if you pick it up and it breaks, to me, that's overdone. It should bend and sag a little, but you don't want it to snap. I mean, once that meat's broke, it's already went too far. You can wiggle the bones a little, and if they feel like they're about to let go, but there's still some pull there, that's right at the perfect spot on ribs, too.
Malcom Reed joining us here on the show. He is pitmaster of Killer Hogs competition cooking team, and also howtobbqright.com, a great barbecue resource that I have been perusing more and more. I found myself, because lots of great info on there, Malcolm. So let's talk about the perfect texture for barbecue. I mean, obviously we're talking about a few different meats here, but if you want to start with the four main KCBS categories and kind of go down, what do you think perfect texture for these are?
Well, when perfect texture, let's start with chicken. When I want to bite into a piece of chicken, I want it to first. I want the skin to bite through. That's just obvious, because that's what your goal is. But then when you bite into the meat, you should know that you're biting into a piece of meat. It has some resistance to it, and this goes for ribs, pork, and brisket. There should be a little bit of resistance, but when you get it in your mouth and on your tongue, you're eating meat. And that's kind of what I said in my newsletter that you probably read. But the same, you don't want it to just disintegrate, and that goes for ribs and pork and brisket. Now, when I'm biting ribs, I want to take away the bite, and I want the rest of the meat to stay there on the bone. I don't want to pull off and strip a bone back, have a glob of meat fall on my chest and some of it in my mouth. That's not, that's overdone ribs. And when you're judging ribs, that's what you look for. You want to just see the bite you take away, the rest of it there on the bone. It's a little different with pork butt. When I look at a piece of pork butt, I like to get it and feel it in my hands first. I give it what's called like a press test. I'll mash it between my thumb and fingers and see if how it feels. And if you mash straight through it and the meat just separates, well, it's overdone. But if it gives you a little bounce back, it's right in the right range, and that's what it should have. And then you can take a bite of it and see how it does in your mouth. And it should just feel like it feels right when you're eating it. It feels like a piece of meat, and it doesn't just disintegrate. That's what I can't stress more when I talk about overdone, mushy. It's almost like peanut butter. That's the best way to describe it. And brisket's kind of the same way. It should pull a little, but not pull apart, and it should have a texture to it as well.
How do we achieve the perfect barbecue texture in these three steps that basically it all comes down to?
Well, first, you got to know what internal temperatures you're going to take whatever piece of meat it is you're cooking to. And once you know that, you're going to have a good thermometer and a way to monitor it the whole time you're cooking it. And so when you get it to there, you got to know how to get it off the heat and rest it. And that's the only three things that you have to know how to do to get it to the right place. I mean, you can say, I get questions all the time about how long is it going to take to cook ribs? How long is it going to take to cook a brisket? Well, that's just a generalization. Nothing cooks exactly to a timeline. It's always to that internal temperature. You definitely have to watch the carryover, especially if it's wrapped. Number one thing what I do is take it and vent it. As soon as it comes off the heat, I'm going to open up whatever foil I have on it, or however if I have it wrapped in a pan or whatever, get the juice off and get the steam off. Because if you don't, that's going to continue cooking that meat. And usually I say, 10, 15 minutes venting, letting the direct heat get off of it after you pulled it off the smoker, lets it stabilize. And then you can go to your Cambro or Carlisle food warmer or whatever you have, just a dry cooler, and it won't hurt you as bad. Now, the more meat you put in something like that, the more heat you're going to have in it, and you still have to factor it in. But, I've even seen, used a probe thermometer in my food carrier just to make sure that I'm not anywhere cooking. I want to be around 140 holding, is where you'd like to be ideally. But you don't want it hotter than the meat you're putting in there. You're going to get carryover, and it's just something that you always have to factor that if you're going to hold it for any amount of time.
And there you have it from August 23rd, 2011, Malcom Reed and Bubba Latimer. There's a lot more information in these interviews. Head on over to thebqcentralshow.com, search Malcom Reed, search Bubba Latimer, search whatever you want to find out if there's an episode about the subject. While you're there, be sure you click on the subscribe button. Never miss an episode of the BBQ Central Show or this show again. Until next time on the best moments of the BBQ Central Show in 10 minutes or less, I'm your host, Jon Solberg, and I will talk to you soon.
The best moments of the BBQ Central Show in 10 minutes or less. Come on, let's go.